There we go. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Oversight Committee meeting Thursday, November 10th, 2022. The only agenda item we have is talking about carports. It says discussion regarding possible amendments to the city's carport ordinance. Ms. Hudson.
Thank you, Mayor. Jane Hudson, Planning Director. So just to kick off the conversation a little bit, so carports have been discussed many times. I went through, so it actually started in October of 2014, June of 18, June of 19, which brought us forward to the current carport ordinance that we have in July of 2020, and it's currently located in Chapter 22, which is the zoning ordinance. Previously, anything regarding carports had been located in Chapter 5, which deals with the building codes. I've got Greg Clark here, my building official, permit services manager, development services manager.
Getting close enough.
Yeah, close enough. And so if there's any questions about building code, I wanted to make sure Greg was here. But nonetheless, I just wanted to enforce that the discussion about carports has been around a long time. And so in July of 2020, we came back and we actually came to an agreement on how carports should be permitted, and one of the things that came from that was they should go to Board of Adjustment for approval as a special exception. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it really did tax a lot of the people that wanted to come forward. So they were then dealing with the additional fees for a special exception running about $200. They had to get ownership list, can go anywhere from $150 to $200. There's the legal ad that has to go in the transcript, which can be anywhere between $50 and $100. And then on top of that, just the general design requirements that we had adopted created additional costs for how someone would design the carport for their property. And one of the things is that you really need the materials needed to match the house that's there, which we all know the cost of supplies has gone through the roof and everything. So it really is just a costly process for property owners. Not to mention, when you do go to Board of Adjustment, there is the risk that your request would be denied. That can come from adjacent property owners maybe protesting, or just that the special exception doesn't really meet the test and it could be denied. We did have that happen in one of the cases. We had 9 requests that had gone to Board of Adjustment, and one of them had been denied. And what's interesting about that one was it was a property owner wanting to build a carport, and an adjacent property owner came and protested, but they were a renter. And so it really does create additional hardship for a property owner that is investing in their property, and you have a renter next door that protests, and there could have been other things that the board had looked at, but nonetheless that one was denied. So in visiting with council members and those in the community, we've come back with a proposal which will somewhat reverse what we did before. What staff suggests is that we take the carport ordinance back out of Chapter 22, which one of the reasons to have it in Chapter 22 in the first place was because of the special exception. So taking it back out of Chapter 22 and putting it back in Chapter 5, and then of course eliminates the special exception request, but we've also toned down some of the construction requirements. Now, we did add the requirement for the roofing material. We are proposing that it be a minimum of 29 gauge material, and we're hopeful that that will move forward. One of the benefits of doing that is we eliminate some of the thinner metal that we're seeing on some of the carports. Not that the other ones are bad, it's just that this is a thicker metal and it can protect the cars more and probably withstand some of the wind, snow loads, so on and so forth. So keeping the request at 29 gauge, we think will be beneficial for, I mean, even the property owner that's installing it, maybe not having to replace it sooner than later.
I know we talked about different gauges. Can you explain a little bit why 29 was settled upon?
So, yeah, in the discussion there, it was kind of a twofold. So one, I went back and pulled a number of older permits, that we'd issued in the last 3 to 5 years. Kind of surveyed those and just categorized what we had been permitting, and that 29 gauge was kind of the mean. And so starting from there, I reached out to 2 or 3 installers that had been providing these and asking them about cost differences between the 29 gauge and the 26 gauge, and got different feedback. Even went to a website that maybe one of you all had been looking at as well, and put the inputs in there and started to find different things. So the general playbook for most of the installers we're seeing for their models was the 29 gauge, and while they could all do the 26 gauge, the cost was going to be pretty notable, like about 30 to 40% for most of them. There was one that wasn't near as much, but most of the others, it was about a 30 to 40% add, which on a small job, that was pretty significant. So $1,000 carport, which that would be really, probably wouldn't find one, but they're probably more like 2,000. But a $2,000 carport now is a $600 add just for the metal, because that ends up not being a stock item for a lot of the installers. So doing a little more research, well, is there a benefit to the 26 gauge was kind of like the next step we saw and heard a lot of. And, from talking to a lot of the installers and surveying, and this is a little bit of ad hominem, but it seemed like in discussion that the hailstorm that's going to, damage the 29 gauge is probably the same one that would damage the 26 gauge. I mean, there's probably some perfect hailstorm that would damage the one but not the other, if you will, but it would be pretty remote.
And I'm hearing that 29's been around for a minute, so you've had a chance to look at some of the older versions that would have the 29 gauge and see how they held out?
Well, I did not make a field study of the topic, I'll be honest. I did not go in the field and see a lot of those installs. I'll just be honest, I did not. I would suggest to you that pretty much anyone you see is more likely than not probably a 29 gauge. And there's probably some not permitted out there that might, as things get unpermitted every once in a while, that might be a lesser standard than that.
But you prefer the higher standard, the 29 gauge to the 26, because you think that's going to protect the car and protect sailing better?
Let me clarify. So in metal gauge thickness, lower is better.
Right.
So 26 is a higher standard than.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I should have clarified that. Yeah, the 29 is actually a lesser standard. No, I guess the determination I made just in the study I did was that the cost benefit analysis wouldn't be there. Like the hailstorm that's going to damage the 26 gauge is probably also going to damage the 29. And in studying up, and this was a good opportunity for studying metal, I mean, from the most metal roof manufacturers, a small protrusion, frankly, is not a failure. I know maybe aesthetically, optically, it's not a good thing, but it is not a failure like that. And so that kind of went back to us. So what was our goal? Do we want, it just seemed like in line with this goal was to try to remove barriers to people getting a carport, and so did we want to, was there a cost, but someone could still get a 26 gauge, right? Like nothing's going to stop someone, and all these companies offer, a better product, if you will, higher gauge, higher thicknesses, but did we as a city, as a council, want to make it, fiscally more difficult, or did we want to allow them to get in the door? And it just didn't seem like the benefit was there, from my opinion.
I agree.
But structurally, good, not gonna fly off with a microburst and hit somebody's house. Or
mean,
could.
I can't speak to every wind event that could happen, right?
Yeah.
Like if the guarantee is to build something that will never, would restrain all of Oklahoma's winds, that we would have to price them out of the market. Like,
But this will withstand some of the historic storms we've seen with hail, like in the last couple years.
Yes, the 29 gauge should be able to withstand hail and certainly not have failures. Will it potentially dent or ding? I mean, again, I can't tell you that it won't. But again, at some point, it does become a property maintenance issue, right? Like, so if you get a little ding, they go up there and they repaint, recoat it. If it does delaminate some of that surface coating there, then it'd be good. There's no.
But this is where like property owners have their insurance and they're claiming this when the storms come through, so.
And that's correct. I mean, although there are a lot of, again, being honest, there are a lot of policies that are just going to flat out exempt something like a metal roof on a carport. Like
Okay.
that is possible and plausible. And so it'd be very much case by case, policy by policy for something that detailed.
Councilman?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify too that even allowing anybody to get a metal carport is a change from what is currently listed in ordinance. So that is also taking some of the restriction out and allowing you to be able to use a metal roof even if you don't have a metal roof on your home, which was the requirement before. And so just kind of also giving some clarification to that as it currently stands, you have to use materials that are like your home. So it would have to be like a shingled roof, typically on the carport. And so being able to move it into this metal structure is hoping to remove some of those restrictions and cost as well.
And there's always gonna be something. I bought an absolutely indestructible poly roof that the last hailstorm that we had destroyed. And so it was the manufacturer's problem after that. It wasn't the homeowner problem, luckily. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
You're fine.
No, I just want to add on to what Greg was saying, and it really is a property maintenance process that we've got to pay more attention to, more staff time, more bodies to, if we get these complaints. I mean, we work proactively, so, we're out there and we see them anyway, so we work them when we're, out in the field. But if we get complaints from neighbors, we're going to have to really enforce, you have to get this cleaned up. If it is damaged and it's torn up, you're going to have to get this cleared up because it is, it's impacting the adjacent property owners negatively.
Just to speak to that point a little bit too, there are, I think Council Member Grant and I are the ones who kind of have been working through this process with some of our residents, and that's why it came to us. When I was knocking doors in February, asking about, why is it so restrictive, and then doing some surveying of just my ward and then kind of in my area where I live. There are a number of carports that look like I think what we're proposing with flat metal roofs, kind of pitched with all of the drainage and metal poles that, from what I understand, have been there for decades. And so there is a consistent basis for utilizing this type of material and this type of design where they have been good for homeowners.
So to make sure we're all on the same page, so there are no design guidelines in here that are going to require flat roof. They will still be able to go to the carport contractor and get, the metal pitched roof. I mean, it's just, I don't know that we could get design criteria enough that we could require those. Those have been there. Like I told you, went back and looked at the pictures and everything, and those have been there years. And so clearly they are an incredible carport structure, but I don't see those at the carport contractors, typically. So to me, these are carports that were built years ago, and more than likely there was probably an individual in the community that was going around and building those. I don't know that for sure, but that just, seems to be that way.
Probably better quality construction than today's.
Big quality construction, the poles are the same poles that have been there for years. I mean, they're just incredible structures, but.
Yeah, so I would just encourage anybody to, if they want, they can just walk around or drive around Ward 2 and see some of those if they're interested in kind of what I think prompted some of this discussion about changing materials.
Councilmember.
So they are still subject to historic district
Oh,
rules
absolutely.
and HOA restrictions.
Absolutely, right. Those will, yes.
And
What is-
they do have to be anchored in the ground, correct, still? They can't just be like,
Yes, there's a,
Yes.
like a tent spike or something is what's holding it in.
well, I mean, I'll speak to that a little bit. There's a lot of different attachment options that they would have. Most of these, are smaller structures. The way the code's written is actually pretty soft and pretty easy for an unoccupied structure in terms of a foundation system, right? So no, it's not gonna be the same foundation that you'd have for a new single-family home.
Sure.
It's a lesser standard,
But
and
would the pole, would it be like it concrete into the
I mean,
ground along the side, along the
we've seen
driveway?
different attachment methods on them that have been able to support. Some of them involve concrete, but not all of them. Some of them do involve the auger style. You might think of a manufactured home style anchor that would be augered in the ground. There are designs we've seen that allowed a large spike, if you will, with like a serrated head that would attach to it and clip to it. So there is, just being honest, there's a number of options that we're able to support on those.
Do you have an opinion about what should be required for that?
I mean, again, I think it's really a cost benefit. Like if we wanted to really ratchet it down and say, no, if we want a concrete anchor or attachment consistent with a house, I guess we could do that, something like that. But again, it would certainly be a higher standard and it would potentially deal better. So, I mean, you have I would hope in any straight line, just kind of day-to-day wind situation, there'd be no issue. But, the downburst or something like that, could it shift one or move one? Well, it
Yeah.
could.
Yeah,
It could, and obviously with, something like a tornado or tornadic conditions, and,
Yeah.
all bets are,
Well, of course, in that situation.
all bets are off there.
See, I'm definitely not as concerned about what they look like as much as they are getting blown off and into the neighbor's house or whatever. So if we want to think about how they're anchored to the ground, maybe keep thinking about that one.
Aren't those anchors, I'm not getting in front of you. Aren't those anchors designed by a professional engineer that go on a plan anyway?
For the submittal requirements for, again, a small accessory detached structure is much less. So I would not say that everyone has an engineered stamp. Sometimes it's more manufactured requirements and things like that, which, those are usually thought out, but it is not necessarily the same threshold as a professional engineer.
Yeah, they still require a building permit.
It would still require a permit. We'd still ask for some form of detail about how they are going to be attached.
And
We'd verify compliance to that standard. But again, for clarity, sometimes that may just be a manufacturer's set of requirements as opposed to, the code approved footing or a professional engineer's opinion.
well, I think before what we were kind of trying to avoid was people just like going to Walmart and
Yeah.
picking one up and taking it home and they just set it down and hammer a spike in and that's it. So I definitely would want to think about that particular point maybe a little bit. But after the redistricting, I've only got one neighborhood in Ward 7 where they're allowed because all the Eagle Cliff area neighborhoods are HOA. I guess Eagle Cliff isn't technically anymore, but there aren't any down there that I've seen. And the neighborhood around Brahms and Millennium is in Ward 1 now, but that neighborhood has several of them. And then some of the houses north of Lindsay on College and Elm and Chautauqua had them as well. But so it's not an issue I've gotten a lot, really anybody in my ward talking about, but it definitely is an issue for a number of years. And I do agree that it shouldn't be so difficult that people can't do it at all, and especially when we've had these weather events and lots of property damage and things like that. So definitely open to adjusting our policies here for sure.
That's what I'm sure.
Just about the conversation that we're having about like tie down attachment into the ground, what are the requirements for like sheds or other parcel, like other things that we can put, that we permit in backyards as well?
Hit and miss, I think, isn't that right?
Yeah, so again, the standard that we've kind of worked with for a while now is this. So if it's a detached accessory structure, not being occupied, generally below 600 feet, the code has some relaxing principles for something like that.
Okay, so this would be in line with what we're already requiring
This
for
would be-
those types of
That's correct.
structures as well. I just want to make sure that we're being consistent when we're thinking about these types of.
Right.
So like, I mean, to Councilmember Holman's point, like I think it is important to think about, can they just be picked up and flown away? And I think we're still, so in the discussions that we've had, are cognizant of, not just going down to get the cheapest carport that you possibly can, and yes, putting a stake in the ground. We're also trying to, not go that route
Right.
and have some standardization, but like be a little bit more flexible in what people can provide. So I think as long as we're being consistent with other structures that could also be picked up and blown in large wind events, then I think that we need to be consistent.
But better than trampolines.
Yeah.
Can't right?
Okay, so 2 points. One, to speak to the Ward 4 side of things. Obviously, I've heard from my constituents, door knocking and after being elected, about the cost and the need from the spectrum of ages, from younger professionals to older folks who are limited by their monthly income and wanting to protect their investment in their car because, in Oklahoma, to get around, you really do need a car. And so, I'm glad we're moving forward with this. And I would say in Ward 4, I have seen carports. And actually, when I moved into my house, the carport that's there has been there through all these storms and hasn't had to be replaced. It makes me curious with the gauges. But I feel the people that have reached out to me, they're really curious about the quality of materials. They already want to get started on it. They're thinking about their car, and I don't think they're going to go for the cheap option. They're thinking about protection and, protecting their investment and their transportation. And to the second point is, and I might have missed it because I came in a little late, but what are we looking at cost-wise for our residents versus like the carport we're trying to amend versus now? Like they had Board of Adjustment costs and whatnot. On the city side moving forward, or is it just a permit for the carport and that's it?
Yeah, they were dealing with approximately $200 for the special exception, $150 to $200 for a certified ownership list, and then there's the legal that has to be in the transcript, and that can, depending on how long it is, $50 to $100.
Yeah, like on the high end, 200, 100, it's 500. So that's taking like 500 out. What does it cost to get a carport permit? And
I believe it's $54.
so that's what it would look like, plus their costs for the materials and labor.
So we would be taking these fees away from it moving forward if that's what we decide. I know.
That's pretty affordable.
Well, and I know we had talked, like you said, three of us, we've been working on this for some time and everything. And in one of the meetings, we were looking at one of the websites, and as far as the 29 versus the 26 and such, and that's when I asked Greg to help me with some research on that and everything. I think it really does stem back to whether it's properly anchored and, the posts that are supporting it and everything. And if they're buying that package, are they typically pre-engineered?
Yeah, they're usually a pre-engineered product versus, and that's kind of one of the big deals too, is so if you were to go build a carport, I want to build a carport, and I was hiring everything out, I'd have to potentially buy a concrete guy, and a framing guy, and a cornice guy, and a roofing guy. And I've involved 5, 6 people, subs in there versus, some of the advantage of doing prefabricated structure like this is, it comes in and it's generally one person, one crew, one installer who can do it all, which again, that's probably the biggest cost driver, is just the number of people that would have to touch, a custom carport versus what we've been discussing.
Well, and I'm glad that you've gone to a metal gauge in doing disaster relief. I've seen those cloth stretch over things just absolutely destroyed. And so there's also an insurance thing that comes in on that. If the buyer should contact their insurance company to see what they will cover and make sure that it's up to their standard. It doesn't have anything to do with us. Please continue.
So there's a couple of things I want to point out. So we've kept, obviously we kept the section about the existing carports. I don't want anything to cause a problem for anybody that had an existing carport prior to the 2020 when we did that and everything. Of course, we still have the combined structures for the impervious area, so that's staying the same. Nothing is changing there. What we're doing, or possibly doing, the 29 gauge. Again, the building codes, local amendments are applicable, and that will be addressed when they get their building permit. They shall not exceed the height of the existing principal dwelling that's there. They're required to install any guttering so that they would not be creating runoff on adjacent property owners. We do have they can extend past the front setback line, but they can be no closer than 7 feet to the front property line, which is what was there before. We've not changed anything. That was actually back when it was in Chapter 5. One of the things that is new, and I want to point this out because I don't want this to be a surprise to anybody later, but again, in your wards, you're talking about the older areas and a lot of times single-car garages. Maybe they're double and everything, but one of the things that we do end up going to Board of Adjustment over frequently is for setback issues. So again, to help property owners, citizens, we've put in this new ordinance that a carport may be constructed within a foot of a side property line so long the structure is open on the side that's adjacent to the property line. And this will save applicants having to go to Board of Adjustment for a variance. And again, sometimes with these narrow lots, you can't get 5 feet. So, and it's open. It's not going to be a combustible material. So I think that's a good trade-off. But again, I'll let you guys make that decision ultimately. So.
Yeah, I mean, I just know in my ward that 5 feet would be, in some areas, very challenging. And so I think as long as we're, having open sides and being thoughtful about that, I think I'm fine with that.
I'm sorry.
No, go, please.
Does open sides have to do with the definition of a carport more than anything else? Because how with closed sides, it's a garage?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. That's
When you say open on the sides, that mean there's not like a wood fence along the property line? And then the carport is being put up next to it, which creates a wall on the side? Is that what you mean?
I was referring to the carport itself. The carport itself does not have a wall.
So it could still be placed even if there was a fence along the property line?
I believe so.
Okay.
Or a
Problem with
screen
that,
or
just
anything
wanna make
else.
sure that's-
I personally have not seen many fenced front yards
Right.
or next to driveways in the front of the property, so I'm sure that
Right.
that's gonna be really rare.
Sometimes you have the half.
Yeah, you got the driveway that would go,
Half fence.
Yeah.
sometimes there'd be a driveway that would protrude beyond the front of the house.
Or a
and then
hedge or
might put
something,
a carport
yeah.
back there.
Yeah.
Just wanna make sure that a hedge or a fence doesn't count as like being enclosed on one side. That's
I
what
wouldn't
we're-
think so. We're always going to run into something.
Sure.
There's going to be that surprise, but.
Okay,
That's
I
not
think
great.
that's fine.
I'm just like skipping ahead because in my mind I'm thinking about January. But so from here, if we have consensus to move this forward, it goes to planning.
I hope to have it on the December Planning Commission.
Okay.
If we didn't have any big concerns, that you guys wanted to change and bring back or anything like that, I would I would like to have it on December Planning Commission, which keeps us on in January.
And what happens in planning commission? Like, will residents, if they're watching, should they come to that and make comment or?
In support or against?
Absolutely. Same thing for the council meeting.
And planning's still advisory in this role too, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Any thoughts to give them guidance as to whether you want to bring it up? What's your pleasure? Do you want them to bring it to planning commission?
Yeah.
Are we good with that?
Yeah.
Please.
Do we have to go to a study session, or can we go straight to planning commission?
I don't think we actually have a rule on that.
No.
There's no rule.
But,
You can
okay.
go to planning
Oh,
commission and then bring it to the full council.
Aye.
Like that, you're sorry.
Okay.
Bring it to the full council at a study session prior to council's consideration.
Okay.
That would have been my thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would come back to the whole council anyway.
So planning commission, and then we could do a study session before
Okay.
we
Yeah.
vote on it.
Before you vote, okay.
Yeah.
I think this is very complete and very easy to work with, and I think it'll solve the problem, so I don't think there'll be any problem bringing that through.
Well, I'm open to suggestions. I mean, I think, I like it, doesn't mean that, somebody else might
Yeah.
not like it, but.
Well, it's an important thing. The lady, you said her name was Valerie, I believe, that keeps on contacting me is just trying to protect her property. And I think that's a perfectly wonderful thing.
Second to your home is the largest investment.
Sure.
in Clark.
And so it's an easy squeezy thing. Anything else? Nothing? We're adjourned.
Thank you.
How about that?
I was gonna ask.